Hey everyone, my name is Triple J, and welcome to my first ever tutorial for Rimworld, a story generator by Tynan Sylvester. In this video, we're going to cover the very basics of getting a game started. I have been meaning to make tutorials on this game for a while and have been asked repeatedly by our community, so here it is. So on February 24th, 2020, the first ever DLC came out, and I figured now would be a good time to create a more updated tutorial for everyone learning to play this game. However, if you do not own this DLC yet, don't worry, because this video will not pertain much at all to the new things offered. I'd say about 95% of this will be explaining your decisions, options, and mechanics that have existed in Rimworld since its full release. So let's get started. We'll go New Colony, and here we'll be greeted with our choice of scenario for the playthrough. We'll have 4 options available to us. Ignore these down here. These are custom scenarios that I made for the different YouTube playthroughs that I have going or have made in the past. But if you've never made a custom scenario, these won't be here. We have 4 options available to us: Crash Landed, Lost Tribe, Rich Explorer, and Naked Brutality. When you click on the various scenarios, it gives you a small backstory, what kind of faction you will be, which relates directly to the research that you start with, and your research speed. New Arrivals, which is part of the Crash Landed Rimworld experience, which we are going to move forward with, they start with things like electricity researched, whereas Lost Tribe does not. Should be noted that Lost Tribe scenarios do slow down your research time as you're starting as a less sort of, quote, advanced faction. Generally speaking, this scenario is more difficult. Below faction, it will show you sort of what resources and equipment you start with. The only scenario that doesn't give you anything is Naked Brutality, which is a real challenge. You start naked and alone. It can be quite difficult, but a very fun one to try. If you are playing Rimworld for the first time, I do not recommend starting with this one. I would start with the classic Rimworld experience just to get your feet wet. That's going to be the one that we do for now, so we're going to hit next. Here we come to the choice of our storyteller for our playthrough. This is where the uniqueness of Rimworld really comes into play. Your storyteller will be the one pulling the strings. They're your puppet master during the game. They'll send you events that will help and, more importantly, hurt you. Your job is to take these events and figure out how to survive through them. Some events can be minor, like one wild animal going insane and trying to attack you, or it could be a fleet of angry space robots that are coming and trying to obliterate you from the planet. These varying degrees of difficulty surrounding these different events are based entirely on 2 things: the difficulty that you set right here, and your colony wealth. A nice piece of furniture you create, the amount of resources you hold, the number of colonists or pawns that you have in your colony, etc., all contribute to your colony wealth. We'll talk more about colony wealth probably in a future episode, but the beauty of Rimworld is the game scales in difficulty as you increase your colony wealth. Therefore, the game never really becomes easy for you. The storyteller just finds ways to make it harder. You must adapt and figure out how to stay alive all the time. Prepare, plan, how to bolster your defenses for the next event that hits you, because it could be the one that ends you. Now, the different storytellers are outlined here, offering a varying way of sending you these events. Cassandra is sort of the classic way of playing Rimworld. She sends events regularly on an ever-increasing curve. Generally, I like to play with Cassandra because of the consistency of the events. Phoebe will send you events, particularly bad events, with a much longer gap in between them to allow you to regroup and get ready for the next one. But don't think that it makes it necessarily easier, because she packs quite a punch after giving you all that time to prepare. And then there's Randy. Dear Randy. He is the storyteller that says it all in his name. Random. He just wants to see chaos. Randy can send you varying difficult events at any time, as stated here in this warning. Randy can be quite fun and challenging. However, sometimes I find, personally, that his consistency of some events can be spread quite far, especially when it comes to sending traders to you to swap goods. But overall, Randy can be pretty fun. Below the storyteller is the difficulty of the events you wish to see from the above storytellers. For players first starting out, I recommend either Builder or medium difficulties. The reason I would not choose peaceful to start is that it disables almost everything in terms of the major events you can receive, specifically raids from other factions or those angry space robots I mentioned earlier. While it allows you to learn the mechanics and the basics of food and general survival, it doesn't really give you the challenge of balancing food production and tending the wounded or recovering from a fight. What happens if your cook goes down in the middle of the battle and takes some time to recover? Will you have enough food to survive that? Rimworld at its core is a game constantly preparing for the worst, and so I recommend playing with a difficulty right away that forces you to hone those skills in every facet of gameplay. Now, it is all entirely up to you. That is just my opinion. You then need to choose reload anytime mode or commitment mode. Reload anytime allows you to save and reload at any time. Commitment mode essentially disables save scumming. The game is about the story that unfolds before you and the tragedy or the sacrifices that will ultimately come. This mode is about letting all that happen without the ability to go back and sort of give it a redo. So we'll choose Cassandra, medium, and commitment mode. Now we must create the world that we want to land on. The worlds are procedurally generated, so you can type anything you like in this seed and it will create something for you. Anything at all. Let's just put in, for our sake, tutorial. Now, globe coverage will indicate whether you want some or all of your planet generated. 100% is very fun, but can lead to lowered performance and can make traveling to the ship, which is part of the win scenario, which we'll discuss in a later video, will make that a little bit harder. We're just going to stick with 30% for our purposes. Then here you can control rainfall and temperature. This defines the biomes that you will have on your planet. If you leave it in the middle, you will have small bits of almost everything, ranging from tropical rainforests in the center to ice sheets at the poles, much like Earth. If you start sliding them, you'll start to see more specific kinds of biomes. For example, if you slide the rainfall to very low and the temperature to very high, you will create a hot desert biome. If you then slide that temperature to, let's say, very cold, well, then you've created a frozen, dry wasteland. For our purposes, let's just keep them at standard. Below this is your population slider. This is new as of 1.1, and it simply indicates how many faction settlements you want on your map. Now, you have a specific set of the number of factions, but what this indicates is how many different settlements within each of those factions you will see. So if you go sparse, you'll see less. If you go crowded, you'll see more. So it depends if you want a crowded world or you want a less crowded world. This doesn't really factor into making the game more or less difficult. It doesn't mean you won't get attacked more if there are more enemy faction camps. However, it could be helpful to you as it allows for more friendly settlements to potentially trade with. So let's just hit generate. Now we see our future Rimworld. Now, as you can see, as we spin around this globe here, that indeed only 30% is generated. However, you can see the entire globe. Also, now you can view all the different biomes available just by clicking on a tile, and the bottom left, it will show you stats about that tile. So, for example, terrain will show you simply how hilly or flat your tile is, indicated by these little markers here. Small hills, large hills are going to look a little bit bigger, and mountainous tiles are the biggest ones. If there's not, they're just flat. Large hills will give you a sizable amount of rock to dig into for resources such as steel, components, plasteel, etc. I recommend this when starting out, as it's a nice balance between small hills and mountainous. Movement difficulty indicates how slow or fast your pawns can move across that tile when caravanning. The higher the movement difficulty, the slower they move. You'll see if you click on roads that the movement speed here is only 0.5. When you move from tile to tile, your pawns will automatically take the fastest route. This will get explained more in a future tutorial. The stone types on your tile aren't necessarily a make or break decision. I would say choose biome and growing period over a specific stone when starting out. but do keep in mind that there are strength levels and hit point differences of each stone type, like if you were to build wall out of them. So granite being the strongest. So this tile is good for that. Elevation is almost relevant in this case. Average temperatures will indicate generally how hot and cold it gets on your tile, which directly impacts your growing period, which is right here below that. Growing periods range from never to always, and everything in 10-day increments in between. So there's 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 out of 60-day growing periods. If it's 60 out of 60, it will be always. There are 60 days in a Rimworld year, split up into 4 15-day seasons: December, April, August, and September. Here it will show you how many days. So the 1st of April to the 11th of September is your growing period. 40 out of 60 is very, very good. Rainfall isn't a major deciding factor, as it doesn't affect the speed of growth on your plants. It does, however, impact movement speed, accuracy of your ranged weapons, among other things, and it can be very handy to put out those nasty fires that can occur outside when a raider sets one of your walls on fire. Forageability is nice for finding berry bushes for your people to eat. That is free food that is on the map. It also impacts how much animals can graze outside instead of needing you to supply them food, which leads us into showing whether they can graze right now or not. Average disease frequency varies depending on biome. Again, the higher the number, the more likely your pawns will get diseases. Tropical rainforests, for example, will have a greater frequency than, say, an arid desert. But an arid desert offers little wood from trees, while rainforests are plentiful in that regard, so you take your pick. Time zone is almost meaningless. However, you should note that if you start on a tile in the northern hemisphere, your summer is August, versus the southern hemispheres is December, just like in the real world. The biggest thing when starting out for the first time is having a relatively balanced biome that affords you a generous amount of growing period, animals to hunt, and some hills to mine from, which can also offer natural protection. Down below in advanced controls, you can set your map tile size, but do keep in mind, the larger you go, the less performance you will have. Honestly, the default is just fine. You can also set which season you'd like to start in. I generally leave it as auto. Then we come to factions. So this is the 5% that I talked about earlier in terms of differences if you have the royalty DLC installed or not. With the DLC, you will see this Empire faction. This will be discussed later on, but generally speaking, they're a neutral faction. So these icons on your map will show the different factions that you'll encounter either positively or negatively. You start out with 3 neutral factions: the Empire, a Civil Outlander Union, and a Gentle Tribe. The names and leaders are generated differently each time. Outlander and the pirate factions down here are similar to ours in terms of advancement, electricity, and all that. Tribal factions are more primitive and will not have as many advanced materials to trade with. The neutral factions will send traders to visit you in peace. The hostile ones will send people to attack you, and you cannot trade with them. The ones showing the -80 are factions that you can actually turn to be your friend. This is done by either capturing their raiding parties and returning them back safely to them for goodwill, or through peace talks events. If you bring a faction either hostile or neutral above 75 goodwill, this is what that number indicates, they will become your allies and can actually help you fight off other raiding factions. You can call them for help. But you can also turn your allies or neutral factions into enemies by killing their traders or capturing their colonists. It's not hard to make them not like you. It's harder to make them like you. The 2 at the bottom here with the -100s, these are 1 angry faction, the Savage Tribes, and 1 pirate band. These factions will never become your friends. It does no good returning captors to them, and they will not send you peace talks to make amends. They will hate you forever. Over here shows who is enemies with whom. If there's a visiting faction on your map that's neutral, at the time a raiding faction shows up and they are enemies of each other, they will fight each other. So the choice is yours, whether to make friends or enemies. But remember, if you run out of friends, you run out of trade partners, and you are indeed alone. Lastly, we come to our colonists themselves. Here is where we decide who we want to embark onto our Rimworld with. Seeing as how we did Crash Landed scenario, we get 3 people to start. You can randomize to your heart's content, and the game will generate various pawns for you to choose from. I know this can all look a little overwhelming, but let's break it down. So at the top, you have the pawn's name, which you can change here or later on once you've landed. It shows their sex, biological age, and chronological age, which just means that this person has spent some time in cryosleep. Their biological number is how long they've aged, not including time in cryo. Generally, pawns with higher biological age will have higher skill numbers. Now, that's not always hard and fast rule, but generally. Below that is sort of their backstory in their childhood and their backstory as an adult. If you hover over this, it will give you a little snippet of what the backstory means and the impact it has on their skills now. So you can see that this person was a herb world urchin, which means that they get a boost to their melee and their crafting, but they get a minus to their social. It also shows that growing and plant cutting is disabled. Okay, so then as an adult, they were a smuggler, which increases their shooting, melee, and medical, and social skill, but down 2 points on their intellectual, and that shows that art is disabled. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. So note that if a pawn is under 20 years old, they will not have an adult backstory yet. Okay, so below this is what the pawn is incapable of. This is affected directly by those backstories, which we just showed. So basically that means that they cannot do any of these things. You cannot tell them to do it. They will never do those jobs based on this. This will be important when determining what pawns to take. Sometimes having a pawn incapable of some things is fine, but when starting out, try to take pawns that can mostly do everything, because if you have none or just one pawn that can, say, provide medical care, you could really be in trouble if that one pawn able to give medical care goes down. The other 2 will not be able to help them get treated or treat themselves, and that's more than likely game over unless you can find another colonist quickly that can help. Down here are their specific traits. Again, you can hover over to see what effects they have. These indicate essentially moods, work speeds, drug habits, social interactions, etc. of your pawn. It's how they react to the world and others. So, for example, this person has a chemical interest. It means they will, if they consume recreational drugs, it creates a good mood. And if they have a mental break, they will ignore directives to not use them, which can sometimes lead to addictions. Another one here, this is a good one. This person is a slowpoke, which means their movement speed is minus 0.2. Now, that might not seem that much, but if they're running from, let's say, a mad animal or a raider, that can be life or death. Also, it just generally slows down them going from job to job. But then there's positive traits as well. That is kind, so they don't judge people by their appearance. Generally speaking, kind people won't get into as many fights with other colonists. These are all things we can explore a little bit later on. So there are very bad traits, and then there are some really good traits. Some will have little impact on your general colony, and others can either save you or ultimately kill you. So then over here, we'll have their skills, what the colonist is good at or not, and what passions they have for those skills. The skills range from 0 to 20. If a colonist has a 0, for this example, this guy has a 0 next to cooking, they can at least perform the function. You can assign the job to them, but they will do it slowly and they'll give you a poor product. For example, if you have a cook with a 0 skill and you tell them to go cook meals, the likelihood of them giving people food poisoning is going to be higher. If there's a dash, again, it means they will never do that job. So this person is incapable of violence. So they can't hunt. They can't even wield a weapon. You cannot even give them one. So there are uses for people like this. If they have really high medical skill, or if they're a very good researcher or something that keeps them safe, maybe they're a very good crafter. You don't always need a fighter. I would recommend when starting out, especially if it's your first time or it's really early on, I would say maybe avoid one of your first 3 colonists to not have, a non-violent skill. Passions. So if there's 1 flame next to a skill, that means they have a minor passion for the job, which allows them to level it up faster, and it provides a positive mood boost as a minor passion for their work when they are doing that job. A double flame means they have burning passion for that skill and will level up even faster and will get a larger mood boost. So no flame, they learn at 35% rate, which you can see there. 1 flame, they learn at 100%. And at burning passion, they learn at 150% rate. Bottom line, passion is very important for leveling up your pawn skills and creating a thriving colony faster. A 0 skill isn't always a bad thing. A 0 skill with no passion isn't great because they're only going to learn at 35%. But 0 skill with a burning passion is certainly workable, as they can level up very quickly regardless. Next to skills is health, and this is another important one. So depending on the ailment, this can impact movement speed, manipulation, moods, etc. So some people, let's see if we can find. So some people will have scars. So scars can range from very little impact onto the pawn to numbing pain that keeps them in a very bad mood. So as you can see, this person has a bite scar on their left leg. It is resulting in an efficiency of only 81% of that leg, and it is giving them 3% pain. Now that 3% pain is going to attribute to a negative, more than likely will attribute to a permanent mood of maybe -3 or -5 because it's a bite scar that's itchy, it's uncomfortable, they're not happy with it. The only way to get rid of something like that is to essentially remove their leg and either give them a different leg or a peg leg or a bionic leg or whatever you have available. This person is addicted to go juice. Now, drug addictions are hard to break and they are in very poor moods when going through withdrawals. Now, you can continue to give them the drug if you have it on hand, but again, there are different consequences for having them take drugs. There are benefits and consequences. But if you don't give them the drugs, it takes them a while to get through the withdrawals and it gives them a very, very poor mood for a long time. So I would recommend when starting out to avoid some of this stuff. Older pawns will be more likely to have chronic ailments like cataracts, bad back, asthma, frailty. Age and these ailments can also affect their ability to recover from illnesses or diseases, which can often kill them if not tended to properly. It's not a deal breaker if a pawn has some ailments, but unless they have incredible skills that you can use, I would steer clear of them for now. For example, this person with the bad back, it's a -30% movement speed, which means they're much slower than anybody else, which is dangerous if they're out in the middle of nowhere and get attacked. They're going to be slower when they do their jobs. Now, if this person was a good researcher, that would be something to consider, or something where they don't have to move as often. Or even art. If they're a good artist, they just have to stand in front of a bench and do the art. It's not a lot of movement speed. Like I said, it's not a hard and fast rule. You can certainly take a flyer on them. It's just that, you're going to be taking a bit of a gamble with their age. However, this person's super immune, so they wouldn't get sick as fast. Or fast learner, nimble. These are all good things. So it's not a hard and fast rule. Play around with it, test it out, see what works for you and what doesn't, because you're going to have your own preferences when it comes to colonists and the different types of skills and traits they have. So you're just going to learn that over time. Below that is their relations tab. So this shows if they have siblings, parents, lovers, ex-lovers, or if they're married. Now, you may not know who the person is that they have a relationship with yet, but that person may show up as a visitor or worse, an enemy faction later on. And if they die, that will have an impact on their moods for a while. We can discuss relationships more in a later tutorial, but for now, it's not really a deciding factor on choosing a colonist, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. Down here is your team skills. So this is a culmination of these top 3 people that you've selected to currently join your colony. It's useful in seeing what skills you have covered and with what passions. Again, balance is always key here. We'll get into specific skills in a later tutorial, but for starting out, just make sure you have every skill possible with your colonists, and definitely some passions across the board so all jobs can get done with relative ease. Remember, you'll be adding colonists throughout the game, so not everything needs to be perfect from the start. So I'm going to start with these 3 people here. If you look down here, we have generally speaking, we have a passion from each of the major categories that are impacted here. Good constructor, mining, cooking, plants, medical, intellectual, all those things that you're going to want. So we're going to start with these 3 people, and then you just hit start. And here is where you'll be greeted with your opening dialogue. Here is where the journey truly begins. I hope this tutorial has helped you. In the next one, we will pick up right here and learn about the toolbar down here and setting up the work tab and more, all the more things that happen in the first few days. For those of you jumping in right now, have fun. You will fail, die, rinse and repeat many, many times. Failure is part of the fun. It's one of the many, many beautiful things about Rimworlds. The stories you're about to embark on will be fraught with problems, triumphs, and sticky situations. Learn and improve each time. Ask me questions below in the comments. Enjoy the many playthroughs of Rimworld we have here on this channel. Make sure to join us live while playing Rimworld over on Twitch sometime to say hello and ask questions. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time.